I never thought I'd find myself back on this platform, not after all these years. The evening air is cool and smells faintly of rusted iron and old memories. In the distance, a lonely freight horn echoes, and I feel the vibration in my bones. I sink onto a weathered wooden bench under a flickering lamp, and the past comes flooding back in waves, sound and color, regret and longing. I spent 40 years as a train conductor. Every day I wore the same Navy uniform and cap, punched tickets with a practice snap, and welcomed passengers with a polite smile. I saw thousands of faces, young and old, joyful and weary, drift in and out of my trains as the landscape rolled by. But among all those souls, one has stayed with me. A little boy with sorrowful eyes who rode my route many decades ago. His name was Daniel. He couldn't have been older than 8 or 9 the first time I saw him, clutching a threadbare teddy bear under one arm and a brown paper bag in the other. Daniel boarded the 540 northbound with his father nearly every Friday evening. They always sat in the last car, 3rd row from the back. I remember because I'd watched them quietly as I walked the aisle collecting tickets. It was hard not to notice them. Daniel was a small, quiet child with dark hair that fell into his eyes and shoulders that seemed to cave inward, as if he were trying to disappear. He wore the same red sweater each time, faded and a bit short at the wrists. I often saw bruises peeking out below the cuffs, faint yellow and blue marks a boy his age shouldn't have. His father was a large man with a temper he struggled to contain, and tired, haunted eyes. I could smell the alcohol on his breath when I passed their seat. It mingled with the cold metal scent of the train. I was in my 30s then, proud of my job yet mindful that a conductor shouldn't pry into passengers' lives. But from the very first day, something tugged at me whenever I saw Daniel. Maybe that's why I paid extra attention to the boy in the red sweater, and maybe that's why I can't forget him. 3:30. A bustling small-town train station in the late 1970s, golden evening light filtering through iron rafters, commuters in vintage attire rushing by as a young boy stands silently beside a weary man. One crisp autumn evening, as orange sunlight flickered through the scratched train windows, I found Daniel alone in the last car. It was unusual. His father had stepped off at the previous station for a smoke, leaving the boy behind for a moment. The chance, I slid into the seat across from him. He looked up, startled, clutching that teddy bear as if it were a life raft. "Hi there, son," I murmured, giving him my warmest smile. "I like your bear. What's his name?" He hesitated, then whispered, "Charlie." His voice was as small as he was. Up close I noticed a faint bruise on his cheek, half hidden by a lock of hair, and my heart clenched. "That's a fine name. I had a bear named Charlie too when I was your age." I lied kindly, hoping to ease his nerves. "You take the train a lot, don't you?" Daniel nodded, casting a wary glance toward the empty aisle, as if expecting his father to appear any second. "We go see Grandma every week," he said softly. "Daddy has work in the city, and I stay with Grandma on weekends." Before I could reply, heavy boots clanged up the vestibule steps. His father swung back into the car, eyes darting. He froze when he saw me sitting with his son. "Danny, what did I tell you about bothering folks?" he barked, voice slurred at the edges. I stood up at once, hands raised placatingly. "No bother at all, sir. I was just keeping the lad company. We were talking about his teddy." I forced a polite grin, but his face was hard. He grunted, then jerked his chin at Daniel. The boy shrank into his seat. His father dropped into the spot beside his son, throwing a rough arm around the boy's thin shoulders. "Mind your business, conductor," he muttered without meeting my eye. I recall how Daniel winced when the man's arm tightened, and how I had to bite back a surge of anger. But I was young on the job then, unsure how far I could go. So I just nodded and moved along, my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. 7 o'clock. Inside a dimly lit 1970s train carriage at dusk, amber light through the windows. A burly man with a harsh glare grips a frightened young boy's shoulder, while a concerned conductor stands nearby, watching anxiously. My suspicions only grew in the months that followed. Each Friday they boarded as usual, and I saw more than I wanted to. Daniel flinching at any sudden noise, his father's mood swinging wildly from brooding silence to bursts of anger over nothing. I'd pass by and feel the man's glare daring me to interfere, while Daniel stared at his shoes. Once or twice, finding Daniel alone, I left a peppermint on his seat with a friendly wink. He looked up in surprise and almost smiled. I cherished that tiny hint of a smile as if it were a gift. Still, those small kindnesses felt painfully insufficient. One week I'd spot a fading bruise on his arm. Next, a fresh mark on his collarbone. He often sat gingerly, as if something hurt. I ached to grab the father by the collar and throw him off my train, but I always hesitated. What then? In those days, intervening in a family's business wasn't straightforward, and I feared it might only make things worse for the boy later. So I watched and I worried. Every time the man's voice rose in anger, a cold knot tightened in my stomach. One winter night, not long before Christmas, the train was nearly empty. Snow drifted past the windows, catching in the glow of station lights as we rolled by. On my final round, I found his father passed out, snoring with an empty flask in his hand, while Daniel sat awake by the window, silent tears on his cheeks. I quietly slipped into the seat facing him and spoke in a whisper. "Are you okay, Daniel?" He wiped his face quickly and nodded, but his chin trembled. I had seen that look in children before, the desperate pretense that everything is fine. It broke something inside me to see it on his face. I pulled a small wooden train whistle from my pocket, an old keepsake from my own childhood. Gently, I pressed it into his hands. "I want you to have this," I murmured. "Whenever you feel scared, give it a blow. It'll sound like a train and maybe help you be brave. And if you ever need me on the train, just use it, and I'll come running, I promise." His eyes widened. I worried he might start sobbing, but he just pressed his lips together and nodded solemnly. "Thank you," he whispered, tucking the whistle into his pocket like a treasure. His father stirred behind us then, so I patted Daniel's arm and stood. As I walked away, I heard a tiny, timid toot from that whistle. The sound was weak but clear, a plaintive little train call in the night. It warmed and wrenched my heart all at once. 10:30, a quiet night inside an old train carriage, snow falling outside, a small boy gazing into darkness with tears on his cheeks, clutching a wooden train whistle, while a kindly conductor watches from a nearby seat. A few months later, in early spring of '78, everything came to a head. The air was damp as we chugged along on a half-empty train. His father was in a foul mood from the moment he climbed aboard, practically dragging Daniel to their seat. I still recall the smell of rain-soaked coats in that car, and the prickle of tension. About halfway through the trip, the train jostled and Daniel accidentally spilled an orange soda on his father's jacket. It could have happened to anyone. Man exploded. "You little idiot!" he roared, his shout echoing down the carriage as he seized the boy's arm. The soda can fell and rolled on the floor, fizzing between their feet. Before I knew it, I was in the aisle beside them. The sight of that meaty hand squeezing Daniel's thin arm drove me beyond all caution. "Hey, take it easy," I said, stepping between father and son. My heart was pounding. "It's just a spill, no harm done." His father's face was a mask of rage, eyes glinting dangerously. "Mind your damn business," he hissed, words slurring. He tried to yank Daniel behind him, but I held my ground. The boy was crying quietly, cradling his arm where his father had gripped it. Other passengers peeked over seats, wide-eyed. The air was thick with fear and the sour stench of beer. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Sir, I can't let you treat the boy that way," I said as evenly as I could manage. "If you don't calm down, I'll have to involve the authorities at the next station." For a moment I thought he would swing at me. He balled one hand into a fist and leaned in close, his face red. I stood firm, even as a trickle of sweat ran down my back. Finally, he released Daniel with a rough shove. The boy stumbled into a seat. "You haven't heard the last of this," he spat. But then he slumped back, chest heaving, perhaps realizing he'd gone too far. Daniel sat frozen, tears streaming as he picked up the fallen soda can. My own hands were shaking as I exhaled. I wanted nothing more than to scoop that child up and take him away, but all I could do was nod stiffly and say, "It'll be all right now." It was not all right, far from it. I reported the incident to my supervisors and to the transit police at the next station, but by then his father had hauled Daniel off into the crowd. Later I was told the man denied everything, and without clear evidence there wasn't much the authorities could do. I was furious and felt utterly helpless. My complaint was filed, and that was that. 1400. A tense scene on a station platform under harsh fluorescent lights. A distraught conductor speaks to two police officers while commuters drift past, and in the distance a burly man drags a boy into the night rain. For weeks after, I scanned every boarding crowd for a glimpse of Daniel, but he and his father never returned. With each passing Friday, my dread grew. Had I made things worse? Perhaps the man chose a different train, a place with no nosy conductor, and continued herding the boy out of sight. Not knowing gnawed at me at night. I barely slept. When I closed my eyes, I heard a child's cry echoing in endless tunnels. Guilt pressed on my chest like a stone. I kept replaying that night on the platform. If only I had chased after them into the dark. If only I had never let Daniel out of my sight. A year passed. Then one summer morning in 1979, I saw a familiar face staring up at me from a discarded newspaper on a station bench. It was Daniel's father, captured in a mugshot. The headline told of an arrest after a domestic incident. My blood ran cold as I snatched up the paper. A neighbor had heard shouting and called the police. Daniel was found bruised and half-conscious, but alive. His father was in custody awaiting trial. It was only a few paragraphs, but it hit me like a freight train. I sank onto that bench, head in my hands, and stared at the black and white print until the words blurred. 1730. A crumpled late 1970s newspaper on a bench. Headline about a domestic assault. A conductor's weathered hands trembling as he grips the paper, his face hidden in shadow while morning light falls on the newsprint. I kept that clipping and read it over and over, as if I deserved the punishment. Each time, I imagined what Daniel had endured after they left my train. Knowing my worst fears had come true brought no relief, only a deeper ache. Somehow, life went on. I continued working the rails for years, punching tickets, greeting new passengers, all the while carrying Daniel's shadow with me. I never saw him again. He likely never rode any train with his father after that. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of a dark-haired boy in a crowd, and my heart would lurch. But it was never him. Decades rolled by. I retired with a gold watch and a handshake, and suddenly the busy days were gone. In the quiet that followed, the ghosts I'd kept at bay caught up to me. On many evenings I'd sit on my porch, watching the sun set over distant tracks, and think of that little boy. Was he happy somewhere? Did he heal, or did those childhood wounds follow him? I prayed that he found some light in life, despite it all. Often I thought about searching for him, but I always hesitated. What if finding him only reopened old scars? What if he wanted to forget? So I did nothing, except remember and regret. That, I found, I was very good at. Then, one rainy April morning not long ago, I was up in the attic, sorting through dusty boxes of old railroad keepsakes, schedules, an extra conductor's cap, a broken pocket watch. At the bottom of one box, I found something that made me gasp. It was the little wooden train whistle I'd given to Daniel. I hadn't realized I still had it. Maybe it fell out of his pocket that winter night, or maybe he left it behind on purpose. Either way, when I held that whistle to my chest, I cried for the first time in years. That whistle felt like a call from the past, one I could no longer ignore. I knew then that I had to face the unfinished business lingering in my heart for over 40 years. I had to find out what happened to Daniel, and I had to tell him I was sorry, that I never forgot him. I began searching in earnest. I made phone calls, wrote letters, dug through public records with the help of a patient librarian. Bit by bit, I pieced together a trail. I learned Daniel had been placed in foster care after his father's arrest. It hurt to imagine, though I was relieved to find no record of anything worse. Eventually, my search led clear across the country. After weeks of trying, I finally tracked down a current address for a Daniel Miller in Oregon. The name and age matched. It had to be him. I sat down and poured my heart into a letter. I explained who I was, or rather who I had been, the conductor from that Friday evening train. I told him I had thought about him all these years, and that I was sorry I hadn't done more back then. I left my phone number and address in case he wanted to get in touch. Then I mailed it off with a hopeful, heavy heart, not even sure if it would reach the right person, or if he'd want anything to do with those painful memories. Days turned into weeks with no reply. I began to accept that my letter might never reach him, or that perhaps Daniel simply chose not to look back. I told myself that at least I had tried, that sending my words out into the void would have to be enough, even if I never heard anything. Then, one late June afternoon, I returned from a trip to the grocery store to find my answering machine blinking. My hands shook as I pressed play. A gentle voice, a man's voice, spoke. "Hello, this message is for Mr. Thompson. My name is Daniel. I got your letter." I nearly dropped the phone. He went on to thank me for reaching out and said he'd like to talk and maybe meet, if I was willing. I replayed that message over and over, tears of relief and joy running down my face. His voice, though deeper and grown, carried an echo of the boy I remembered. It was like hearing a ghost come back to life. I called him back, and in the first few conversations we bridged 40 years of life. At first, he remembered very little, but soon the details surfaced. The candy, the whistle, the conductor who tried to help. We talked for hours, sometimes falling into thoughtful silences, sometimes laughing shakily through tears. He told me about his life after his father was taken away, how angry and afraid he was for a long time, how it took years to trust anyone again. His grandmother and a good foster family raised him, he said, and eventually he moved out west. Of all things, he became a school counselor, a man devoted to helping children through their own pain. His tone was gentle and warm, tempered by a resilience I could only admire. Yet beneath it I could still hear the faint tremor of that hurt little boy. Before long we decided it was time to meet face to face. Daniel insisted on flying out to see me. I offered to come to him instead, but he just gave a soft laugh and admitted he'd already booked a flight. He said he'd never lost the childhood thrill of flying. We picked a date in July. The weeks before his visit passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. I kept wondering, would I recognize him? Would he recognize me? What would I say when I finally saw him again? The day he arrived dawned bright and clear. We agreed to meet at the old train station in my town. It felt right. I waited on the platform in my best suit, my old conductor's cap tucked under my arm for good measure. When the westbound morning train pulled in and passengers began to step off, my heart thudded like a locomotive. Then I saw him, a tall, lean man in his 50s with kind eyes and a tentative smile. He stood on the platform as if unsure he should move. In his hand he held a small wooden whistle. Seeing that token from our past cradled in his fingers filled my chest with emotion. "Daniel?" I called, my voice trembling. He looked over and broke into a smile, warm and gentle, somehow both unfamiliar and achingly familiar. Emotional. "Mr. Thompson," he greeted me softly. For a moment we simply stood there, two figures separated by decades of life and a few feet of concrete. Then I opened my arms. He stepped forward and fell into my embrace with the eager strength of the boy he once was, and I held him tight, feeling the shoulders of the man he had become shake as he cried. My own tears fell onto his shoulder. 2100, a sunlit train platform in summer, An elderly man in a neat suit and conductor's cap embraces a middle-aged man tightly, both of them with eyes closed and tears on their faces. The world around them blurs in golden morning light. Later, we sat on a bench, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing quiet smiles. He told me more about his life, how he never saw his father after the trial, and how eventually he managed to forgive the man, if only to free himself from the past. He had married and has 2 children. He even showed me photos of them, bright-eyed kids who only know love and safety. He was proud, and rightfully so, that he broke the cycle and became the father he never had. And I, in turn, shared a bit of my own story, though none of it felt as important as what I needed to say. Under that wide summer sky, I finally let out the words I'd held in for so long. "Daniel, I'm sorry," I choked, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I couldn't do more for you back then." Fresh tears blurred my eyes. He rested a hand on my shoulder and gave me a tearful smile. "You did enough," he murmured. "You tried. You were the only one who ever tried. I never forgot that." He even gave a soft laugh as he wiped his eyes. "Besides, you gave me this," he said, holding up that little whistle. "I've kept it all these years. You told me it would help me be brave, and somehow it did." In that moment, a great weight lifted off me, a weight I'd carried for most of my life. The forgiveness I'd longed for, from him and for myself, was real and right there between us. As much as I needed to hear his words, he had needed to know that someone truly cared. It was like a missing piece of both our hearts clicked into place that day. Now the sun is low, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. I linger on the platform for a minute after Daniel heads towards my house. I stand alone, watching the tracks gleam in the twilight. In the distance, a train whistle blows, this time from a real locomotive, and its echo rolls across the fields before fading away. I close my eyes, listening to that echo as if it were the voice of the past, finally at peace. Not every story gives you a chance to set things right. I can't change what happened to that little boy so long ago, but finding him again, seeing the man he became, showed me that even after great darkness, light can still be found. That forgiveness can find us, even when we don't know how to seek it. I rise from the bench, my knees creaking and my heart full. Settling my old conductor's cap on my head one last time, I give a playful salute to the empty platform and smile. It's time to go home. The past has finally pulled into the station and let me off, and I feel nothing but gratitude for whatever time I have left, wherever the tracks may